Okay, it's 1:45, everyone. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. I'm pleased that you've had a good break because this is going to be a super exciting, fast-moving and challenging session. Wait one more minute till everyone's had a chance to sit. So I'd like to acknowledge the land on which we meet this afternoon, the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we respect the achievements of their elders, both past and present, and of course look forward to what they will create in the future through their emerging leaders. Welcome to the new world of artificial intelligence. And yes, we are real up the front, but we could be replaced by a Gen AI model. This is a very exciting field, even though it's been around for over 30 years. I remember, for those of you who are too young to remember the early 1990s, I'm not, we were given to believe that within 10 years, all work would be replaced by artificial intelligence bots, and we already had robots making cars in Japan by then, and we had chatbots answering phone calls, although that didn't prove quite so attractive in the end. So AI has been around a long time, but it's the introduction of generative AI in more recent years that has made the plane far more active. Tremors keep moving through, and everybody is still trying to find the balance on the field. And the excitement of the field is illustrated by one man's experience just in the last week, who'd want to be Mr. Altman. Yes, he and his company are now back to being worth $90 billion, but 3 days ago they were worth $0 billion and struggling. So an interesting, fast-moving, exciting field, one that will challenge not only the whole sector, the whole economy, and the biggest risk from the point of view of the sector, one that Mary Russell, that is, in her presentation mentioned, need to look forward and anticipate risk, because the biggest risk that is out there is the opportunity you don't take. It's my pleasure to introduce your speakers. So the session has been guided, massaged, and will be headed by Dr. Helen Gniel. Helen heads up the Higher Education Integrity Unit within TEQSA, and she's done that since 2021. Before that, she was at a couple of universities. She's an academic originally from the ANU. We also have Associate Professor Jason Lodge from UQ, and Jason is Associate Professor of Educational Psychology. Forgive me for reading this, but I want to make sure I get it right. And Director of the Learning, Instruction and Technology Lab in the School of Education. Jason's research with his lab focuses on the cognitive, metacognitive and emotional mechanisms of learning, primarily in the post-secondary settings and in digital learning environments. But clearly, expertise in the field. We have Rowena Harper, Professor Rowena Harper, who's Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education from Edith, Cowan. She's not yet online, but she is presenting from her home base in Perth. Rowena commenced as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Education last year with a portfolio that includes the library and the Centre for Learning and Teaching, and she's held the role of Director of the Centre of Learning and Teaching before that, and she leads a number of major projects, one of them which is Learning Management System Transition. We have the pleasure of two proponents of the sector as students and, of course, future leaders and creators in the field. So Leo Shchurov, who's a computer science student at UTS, and he's undertaking a degree, is in his fourth year, president of the UTS Programmers Society. He's deeply passionate about independent learning and sharing his program experience. He was drawn to artificial intelligence potential to solve problems, particularly with recent developments on the generative side, and how it can help higher productivity in those fields. And lastly, but absolutely importantly, Raphaella Revis, who's a law and IT student, also at UTS. She's in her third year in the Bachelor of Law and Science Science in Information Technology, and she's a passionate pursuer of the intersection between law and technology, and she's demonstrated that herself with some of the work she's done in showing how technology can help law practice. So they're our speakers, and I welcome you all. Helen will be speaking first, and then followed by some of the others. In fact, everyone will have a chance to have a say. Some will have slides to show, some will speak, and hopefully we will have a good time. But the most important thing of all is that you should ask lots of questions, because this is a moving feast and a moving field, and one that is not only challenging, exciting and opportunistic. So Helen, why don't you show us a little bit about how the field is evolving? You might need to turn it on.
Hello. Okay. Hi, everybody. It's funny being up here because I can't actually see you, but I'm assuming there's an audience out there. So thank you very much for joining us, and thanks, Steve, for that introduction. I don't have slides. I know that about a third of the audience were in the workshop yesterday, and so you've seen my slides, and anyone who's watched the webinars that TEQSA and Cradle have put on has also seen my slides. So what I wanted to do today was I'll give a little bit of an overview, but I also wanted to allow plenty of time for my other panellists, and we were really keen to make sure that we left a good chunk of time at the end for questions and answers, because we really get so much from the engagement we get from the sector, and it's a wonderful opportunity with these two fantastic students here for people who have burning questions about how students feel about these tools and how they're using them. But I was charged with giving just a quick overview of the legislative viewpoint, I guess, or the regulatory viewpoint. So as most of you sitting in the audience know, the Higher Education Standards Framework sets out the minimum requirements that we expect everyone who offers higher education in or from Australia to be compliant with at all times to ensure that there's quality education. And within those standards, there are specific standards related to academic and research integrity, and it's phrased that institutions are required to identify foreseeable risks to academic and research integrity and to take appropriate action. And I really like both the principles and very future-facing way that standard is focused, because it recognises that higher education doesn't operate in a static environment. So things are changing all the time, and the kind of risks and threats that might appear in the business model are changing all the time. So the expectation is that people in institutions leading those institutions are really plugged into those risks and taking action to mitigate them. There are also other standards related to learning outcomes and assessment, and also qualifications and certifications and handing over awards to individuals. At the TEQSA conference last year, we also had a panel on artificial intelligence, and that was about 1 week before ChatGPT launched. And so I actually watched it again this morning while I had breakfast. It stands up pretty well, I'm pleased to say, but we had Phil Dawson and Sarah Howard, amongst others, who are still really engaged with this work. But Australia was very much a leader in kind of putting that on a national conversation with our providers and making sure people were starting to think about it. Our Chief Commissioner, Peter Coldrake, first wrote out to all providers in March 2022 to talk about the increasing sophistication of this technology and that providers needed to start thinking about it. But nevertheless, we were still blown away when ChatGPT landed, just with the level of sophistication and the ease of interaction. And it was something quite different. You didn't need to know anything about coding or technology to now interact with this technology. So in the 12 months since ChatGPT launched, we have demonstrated our commitment to partnering with the sector and also with the experts within our own sector to support our institutions to really think deeply about the ethical implications of these tools and to also think about the impact of them on teaching, learning and assessment practices. This support has included 5 webinars that I mentioned briefly earlier, and they are available online. They were run in conjunction with Cradle out of Deakin University. We also developed the AI Good Practice Hub that is on the TEQSA website, where we curate resources from Australia and around the world to help people mitigate and really conceptualise risks and opportunities in different ways from where we see good practice around the world. And most recently, the discussion paper that we launched in September called Rethinking Assessment in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And we were very lucky to have Associate Professor Jason Lodge lead that project for us, along with Phil Dawson, Margaret Beeman and Sarah Howard. And Jason's going to have a chance to talk a bit more about that in a minute. As we look to the next 12 months, TEQSA is committed to ensuring that the sector does transform its teaching, learning and assessment practices so that we can ensure that graduates are equipped to go out and effectively and ethically engage in a society where AI is increasingly common, and also that risks to research and academic integrity are mitigated where necessary. So both of these are critical. Okay, so we're not advocating that assessment security or academic integrity is the only thing we need to be thinking about. We recognise that banning these tools is not feasible or desirable. What we actually want is a really meaningful, scaffolded, thoughtful engagement of these tools into the education of our students. So, as Steve mentioned, I was at the ANU. My PhD was in neuroscience, and then I was the second-year coordinator for biology and taught into the medical school at ANU. And so, for a very long time, medical education has been this traditional model of biomedical education. But with increasing data available about patients, increasing demographic data, and now increasing AI tools, we actually need a new model of biotechno education. It's not enough to just understand biology and physiology. We're going to need our medical practitioners and people in a whole range of professions to also understand how these tools operate, how they can be used, and how they can be sensitive to the types of data and decisions they can help guide, so that they're not deferring to a tool that of course has limitations like any tool, but that they genuinely understand how they can interact with it and use it in their practice. So that requires more than a bolt-on. Right? It's not enough to just add in a unit that says, oh, by the way, this is AI. Right? We need a much longer-term strategy where it really is deep embedding of AI into the teaching, learning and assessment activities within our awards. To foster a collaborative and whole-of-sector approach, we wrote out to the sector in early October to advise that in June next year we'll be issuing a request for information to every provider for the submission of credible action plans that demonstrate how providers are, I guess, engaging with this risk for their own particular context and suite of courses. It is very contextual. It won't look the same in every provider. I don't have one single answer or silver bullet that I could tell you. This is about ensuring that within the leadership of every institution, there's a deep and genuine engagement with what this technology means for teaching, learning and assessment, and with the capabilities of graduates who are going to leave our institutions. We want to make sure that we're not just upholding our current standards, but that we're facilitating a responsible integration of these technologies into our education system. We're not blind to the scale of the challenge that this presents for providers, and that's why we want to ensure that that leadership is there by issuing that RFI, that everybody has to engage with this. It's not just going to be for some providers and others to pretend that it's not an issue. Okay, we need everybody to really be thinking about what it means. I think yesterday when Danny Liu, not sure if he's here today, but Danny gave that brief presentation of the power of these tools, and there were a lot of jaws on the floor. There was a lot of people who hadn't realised, even in 12 months, how far those tools have advanced. And of course, that pace of change is likely to continue. So we need to make sure that providers are engaging with the risks, they're developing those action plans, and they're really giving consideration to the prioritisation and resourcing required to make that scale of change. I'm going to stop there because, as I said, we're really lucky to have these couple of students with us, and I wanted to ask you, Raphaella, as a current student, how well equipped you think that your tutors and academic staff are to incorporate the ethical and effective use of AI into the curriculum?
Thank you for that question, Helen. So I think it very much depends if we're talking about academics or tutors themselves in being equipped. On the academic level, I think educators are becoming more and more equipped with the theory, but not having that much technical, practical knowledge. And that should really stem down to tutors and casual academics and visiting scholars who tend to have a skewed perception of the capabilities of AI and what it can and can't do. And that flows into assessments and marking when students can be marked down just because of being suspected of AI, simply because educators are not aware of the extent of AI and what AI means. I think that would pretty much be at the outset. They're not practically equipped for it. There needs to be more professional development and training going through the whole hierarchy of the teaching team and not just at that higher level.
Yeah, thank you. And Leo, I understand you're an early adopter of these tools, a super user. Do you have a view on how the current crop of academic staff can support and extend your use of these tools while still ensuring that you're developing innate skills that don't rely on a co-pilot?
Right. So my personal experience with the best way to teach someone one-on-one, the best way to teach someone learning skills is by teaching them one-on-one. So one-on-one conversations, helping them understand the concepts better. And I believe the best way AI can help teach innate skills is by creating chatbots that talk about the concepts one-on-one with the students. I'll probably go more into that later on as well. But yeah, it is possible to create chatbots that have a specific purpose, that have a specific knowledge set that they can draw from, and they can talk, they can basically be robotic tutors that help the student understand the concept better. And there's definitely been research in this field. For example, if you're familiar with Khan Academy, they already have working versions of this that they've been trying to implement into their platform to help students have a virtual tutor that understands where they went wrong in some answer and helps them guide them to the right answer. And yeah, that helps students get the skills down rather than just relying on AI alone. And of course, another thing I'll probably talk about more later as well is I really believe that we should move towards project-based learning as the primary form of learning for all applicable fields. But yeah, I'll probably cover that more in the future question.
Raphaella, can I ask you, one of the things that we hear a lot about is this idea that critical thinking is the thing that we need to focus on. What's your sense about how these tools are interfacing with this idea of critical thinking from your perspective?
From my perspective, I think AI can actually, which is a bit of a controversial one, is that AI can actually propel students into thinking more critically by making sure that they know the subject matter well enough to ask the right prompt and to actually analyze what the AI itself has generated, because many times it does need that human oversight and critical thinking and knowledge of the actual content to know how well it actually responded. And it can also be used to fact check and proofread actual, not just assignments, but even for educators to prevent cognitive offloading for them, in the way that once they do write an assessment, they can input it to the AI and ask it to interpret to see how clear it actually is, and if they maybe wrote it in a way that wasn't quite as intended. So in that way, it actually prompts people to start thinking more critically and analytically and choosing their words more carefully. So I think it actually does the opposite from cognitive offloading, so long as educators are trained and tell their students how to use it in a safe way and frame it in that way.
And Leo, one of the areas of your interest is coding. Can you tell us a little bit about how you can gain productivity in the coding process as a result of using Gen AI tools?
Right. I think the best reference to give would be the recent presentation from GitHub, where they basically, originally GitHub 20 years ago was founded on Git, but now they're refounded themselves on AI, which is a controversial statement. But during the whole presentation, they were talking about how their main goal is to keep developers in the flow state. So I feel like that's one of the best uses of AI for me to like progress much faster, learn faster, and do things faster is by it lets me stay in my flow state. Because I was an early adopter of AI because I was using GitHub Copilot way before ChatGPT came out, and GitHub Copilot allows me to quickly accept snippets of code that it generates on the spot. So I don't need to like write annoying boilerplate code or anything like that. I can just like write a small comment, and I kind of know what it would probably generate, and then accept what it generates, and I don't have to like break out, go search the documentation or any of that. Like I know I have a vague prediction of what it will do, and it does it for me, and I don't need to, I just keep going. But at the same time, it also helps me learn much faster as well. So another example I have is recently for work, like just last week, I've been tasked with making a new application in a very like 50-year-old programming language that no one uses. If anyone's familiar, it's eLisp, which is a Lisp dialect made for Emacs, and Emacs is very old as well. So like it's some very bespoke thing that is very hard to find documentation on. But I just ask AI, like I have a conversation with it saying, hey, I want to get started doing this specific task. How do I get started? And it tells me how to get started, and then I go from there. There was like one minor like half-accurate thing it told me, but overall, it helped me learn it like within a single day, or learn enough to get started in a single day, as opposed to an entire week or more it would have taken me without AI. So yeah.
So you're taking me back a long way. As a former Fortran, COBOL, and PL1 programmer, I would have liked those tools.
Yeah, I feel like, I was going to say, like, it's nice talking to AI because it doesn't feel like I'm taking some professional's time. So talking to AI is like talking to a professional who, like, everyone makes mistakes. Humans make mistakes as well. But when I talk to an AI, I'm not stealing someone else's time to ask dumb questions about how do I execute eLisp in Emacs. It's very confusing.
So you guys are both a couple of years into your degree, 4 years, I think, and 2 years. Third year. So I might go to you first because you mentioned project-based learning, but then I'd like to hear from you as well, Raphaella, just about any views you have about how you'd like to see assessment transform to make use of these tools and accommodate them.
Yeah, as I was mentioning earlier, I personally would really advocate for assessments to become much more personalized, and just education in general to become much more personalized. And to give an example from myself, which will tie into the whole point later, is like, personally, the way I learn is by seeing a bunch of concepts during tutorials. Like I pick up the general ideas and concepts and the names of those concepts and how they generally connect to each other. I don't remember the specifics. I barely remember like quotes or like exact commands or anything like that. I just remember the concepts, and I can always go to Google or recently go to ChatGPT to ask, how do I actually use those concepts together? But again, I was doing this way before ChatGPT, like, yeah, all through high school. The struggle is when I don't have internet access anymore in closed book exams, especially with very strictly prescribed structures, I cannot like properly know how to approach them on the spot because I rely on a second brain, which is the internet, to perform my tasks, and it makes me work much faster when it's available. But yeah, because of that, I really, really struggled through high school, for example. And I feel like my experience is not as bad as it gets for people with other, for example, neurodivergent people with ADHD. They would struggle even way more than I do in those kinds of environments, which high school, university does as well. I've had exams in university where I had the same kind of feeling, where I was struggling because I didn't know how to. I didn't have my second brain with me. So yeah. Personally, I want to reach. I would like to see education reaching a point where it is way more personalized, and you have students are expected to work on a project and then learn from the project. As was mentioned earlier, I'm the president of the Programming Society, and I get a lot of questions into how do you learn programming, and my answer is always you should start on a project, because that's where all my programming knowledge comes from, just personal projects. I'm mostly self-taught. But they don't know how to start a project, and I feel like university could play a really big role in A, helping people start projects, and B, creating chatbots that assist them as tutors throughout the project so that we don't take tutors' times because the tutors don't have enough time to assist each student individually. But yeah, and another thing is, I feel like overall, a lot of our marking, like how we assess students, all comes down to marks and how we like convert a student's performance into a statistic. But clearly, it's like AI struggles with this as well. But maybe we should rethink how we approach marking students as well. I'll probably cover more of that later as well.
Raphaella?
Just on the point of marking, I think at the outset, we do need to change the actual grading scheme and what we grade students on in assignments, which changes into the types. To elaborate on that, specifically talking to the legal side of assessments, in that there's a lot of onus on structure and legal referencing and headings, which while they are important skills for students and practitioners to know in any discipline, that's something which now AI can easily generate with more accuracy than other topics. So I think changing from putting a lot of onus and marking weight on that, it should be more the practical, theoretical knowledge, applying it into real-world situations, which may even look like doing a project such as writing a client interview or advice generated by AI and asking the student to critically analyze that to see how well the AI has generated it. I think taking a step further back, assessments do need to start integrating more tools on critical thinking generally, so students can have that notions on how to critically think and fact check and analyze, because I think that's a bit lacking in terms of content leading to assessments. It's mostly a criteria for assessments, but not really taught in that way, and specifically for AI, how to analyze AI and the content. So I think that's where it goes.
Thank you. That might be a good moment, Jason, to throw to you for...
Yeah, I was going to add to that because like there's this notion in programming where like it's a really bad idea to measure people by the amount of lines of code they write, because lines of code generally doesn't reflect the quality of the code. And I feel like the same applies to assignments. So for example, I would say words are cheap, quality, ideas, and skills are what's expensive and what matters, and what we should be assessing. So like an example assignment that would be that would not stand up in the age of AI is a long reflective assignment, contrary to popular belief, because people just make dot points based on their experience and then get AI to generate it instead. Because like, why would I spend days writing, hundreds of words, not thousands of words, like in some of my assignments, and instead of just like giving it some dot points and letting it do it all for me. I had an assignment this semester, and another friend also had an assignment this semester where we both just generated it with AI, because like, why would, like, the assessment was worth 10%. The tutor even admitted that he'll barely read it because there's too much words. So like, of course I'm gonna generate it. So, again, I feel like we should heavily rethink how we approach assessing ideas and skills rather than just words alone.
Thanks, guys. So Jason, good time for you to talk more about the assessment principles and how you came up with them.
Thanks, Helen. I should hopefully have some slides lined up for you. While they're coming up, I wanted to start by saying that there was a kind of episode that I had a few weeks ago where I shared a taxi with somebody who I would class as a super user. So for those who were in the session that we had yesterday, Danny's one of those people. These people can do really amazing things in a very short time frame. He used a text tool, a image generation tool, and a video tool to make a video of himself talking about a topic that he'd never spoken about, with a deep fake of him in it on his phone in 90 seconds. The thought that kept going through my head was, oh crap, we're in trouble. And that's the most recent of quite a number of those moments that I've had this year while I've been thinking about this stuff. Now, the reason that I wanted to mention that story is that often, and I've heard this many times this year, this technology is kind of like a calculator, right? We dealt with that. Maths education wasn't thrown out the window. So, we'll adapt to this technology just the same as we adapt to calculators. I think that we can probably say, and based on what we've heard already today, that these tools, these technologies are capable of far more than that. right? And I think that's worth kind of unpacking, which is something that we've attempted to do here. So this is some work that I did with my colleagues Sujing Yang, Leon Furs and Phil Dawson, who many of you know. We think about this idea of cognitive offloading. Calculators work really well for that, right? We need to do a calculation, we offload it to the calculator, it gives us a response, and we do whatever we're going to do with it. On the other hand, we can think about how we might extend what we're able to do with our minds. The phone is a really good example of this. Right? For anybody who's been around long enough, remember when we used to have to remember everybody's phone number? Right? We don't need to do that anymore. So that technology has become an extension, right? So some things we offload, some things we extend. Now, largely we do that as individuals, but what I think generative AI and AI more broadly provides is opportunities to think about a much more collaborative kind of way of working. And I think Leo's example is a really good one, where we're now starting to see much more of an interaction, a collaborative approach to this. Now that can also, we feel, work in an offloading way or in what we're calling a hybrid way. So what we mean by offloading is that I'm having difficulty with a task, I'm stuck on something, I go to a generative AI, it gives me some help and I can get it to prompt me to work through it, right? That's very different to a calculator. And then if we're thinking about something where it becomes a fully hybrid kind of collaborative approach, and we're starting to see hints of this already, this is where humans and machines work together to do things that are way beyond what either could do on their own, right? And we're seeing many clues of that already. So where does that kind of leave us? Myself, Sarah Howard, who unfortunately couldn't be here, who was really critical in all of this work, and Jacqueline Broadbent, who is here. Around the middle of the year, we thought, what are really the options that we've got on the table here, right? How viable are those options over the short, medium, and long term? And I'm going to talk about these a bit more in a minute because I think we need to update this, right, from a few months ago. So I'm going to come back to this. But I want to focus mostly on the first one, right? So there is this kind of spectrum, I think, that we're dealing with here. At one end, this is not going to be a thing. We don't need to worry about it. We can ignore this. It's all going to go away. And I can have some sympathy for that. I've been around long enough to remember when MOOCs were going to change everything and there were only going to be 3 universities in the world by, well, about now. Back to electronic whiteboards, remember that one? Right? It was going to change everything and now there's many of them collecting dust around the place. So we've kind of heard these stories before and I can see that there would be some skepticism that this is different. You know, every time previously we've been told this is different, this is different. I think this is different, right? Now, we can then start to think where we might find ourselves on this spectrum. And if you look at some of the commentary that's out there, here's Bill Gates earlier in the year, AI-driven software will finally deliver on the promise of revolutionising the way people teach and learn. It will know your interests and your learning style. No, it won't, Bill, because learning styles is crap. But that's a very positivist kind of booster sort of position. At the other end, oh boy, Professor Stuart Russell, who wrote the kind of authoritative textbook on AI. It's likely to spell the end of education as we know it, and also there's all this stuff about our environmental crisis and nuclear war. Oof, bleak. So I put myself about here. And I may move that a little bit based on all the nonsense that's going on at OpenAI over the last week, maybe a little bit further down. But I think it's good to think about where we might find ourselves on these spectrums, to think about how we might then approach what it is that we're dealing with. There's no right or wrong answer here. Look, there are risks and there are opportunities here. And again, that's been a theme that we've been talking about today. Where I'm going with this is that I think the option of ignoring this is no longer viable. Right? This is a thing, the genie's out of the bottle, it's everywhere, it's embedded in a lot of the productivity tools that we use day to day, which leaves us a number of other options here. The idea of a blanket ban, the kind of thing that we saw in a lot of the states in the public school sectors, if you're going to ban something, you've got to police it, and that is seemingly very, very difficult. So I think in the long term, and certainly that's what the state ministers seem to have agreed, is that this idea of a blanket ban of using these things is not really viable either. The fifth one I think we can take off the list as well, and this is the idea that we can design around these things. So in a rush at the beginning of the year, I have several courses that I teach, I put my assessment tasks in them, and sure enough, ChatGPT generated a bunch of nonsense that would not have passed. That changed dramatically when GPT-4 was released, and actually it's not the best job I've ever seen, but it's passable. So the idea that we can get around the limitations of the data that's in these systems, I think is also no longer viable. So where does that leave us? I think we have three options. One, we're calling it invigilate, and this is the kind of thing that we're talking about with pen and paper exams. There has been a place for that in the past. There is a place for that now. My sense is there will continue to be a place for that in the future. Is it everywhere? Probably not. Right? I teach future teachers. The sorts of things that I want my students to be able to do and the way that I want them to be able to operate in a classroom when they leave university is not the kind of thing that I can easily capture in an exam. Right? It's not going to work for my context and no doubt in a lot of other contexts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about rethinking now because that leads into the work that we've been doing this year. And then I want to come back to what it means to embrace this because I think that those are connected issues. So, Helen's alluded to this already. Very happy to show you, and this has now been released on the TEQSA website. There is an updated version to assessment reform for the age of artificial intelligence. And at this point, I wanted to say thank you to every person, every group, every institution that has provided feedback or otherwise been involved in this work. I think it's fair to say that although there's a small group of us who were in the room in Sydney in August when we started to put this together, and that was an amazing opportunity, and thank you, Helen, again for leading us on that. What I think is really encouraging about this is it now represents the thinking, the generous thinking of over 100 people, organisations, groups. I've read every single comment that everybody's made on this. They were very thoughtful, every single one of them, and it forced us as a group to think very carefully about how we integrate and balance the different views about where we need to go with this. As a bit of a reminder, I don't want to spend a lot of time going over the principles and propositions again. They're in the document, it's live on the website. But what I did want to reinforce here is that one of the themes that I think has emerged across the day today is that we're in a period of a lot of change. Right? These tools are developing, and it's not just the technologies, it's our capabilities in using these tools, right? And our students' capabilities in using these tools. Right? So all of these things are advancing rapidly. We can't possibly map that out. Right? Silicon Valley can't even decide what they're doing tomorrow. Right? So what we thought we could do collectively is come up with a compass or a sense of direction. As I said, I won't spend a lot of time on the principles and propositions. They're largely the same, though we've tweaked them because I think people provided very good feedback about some ways that they were unclear. I'd encourage you to watch the video. Helen's mentioned the videos already. Watch it at double speed because we're all short on time. That might help you get through it quicker. Excuse me. So we do have two guiding principles. Assessment and learning learning experiences should equip students to ethically and actively engage in a society where AI is ubiquitous. We did say pervaded before, people didn't like that, fair enough. Forming trustworthy judgments about student learning in a time of AI requires multiple, inclusive and contextualised approaches to assessment. Those are paired with 5 propositions. Those propositions are that assessment should emphasise appropriate authentic engagement with AI, a systemic approach to program assessment aligned with discipline and qualifications. We've tweaked that one a little bit. The process of learning, one I'm going to come back to. Opportunities for students to work appropriately with each other and AI, because it's not going to be just a one-to-one relationship here. We're seeing very complex kind of networks of learning starting to form. That includes peers as well as technology, and security at meaningful points across the program to inform decisions about progression and completion. We need to be absolutely certain that the students have done the learning that they need to have done. So to kind of wrap up my comments here, I just want to talk a little bit more about the process of learning. I think for very good reasons, we're focused on the acute problem, and the acute problem that we have is the risk to assessment. Right? But I think that has to work hand in hand with the way that we're thinking about what learning now looks like. And hopefully the comments from the students are giving you a sense about why we need to start thinking about that more carefully. So it is in the principles, it is in the propositions, and we were very careful with the wording of these things because we wanted to signal the importance of learning in all of this. So what are we really talking about here? Well, the other option we had was to embrace these technologies, and it is increasingly looking like that we need to do that because they are going to be part of what our students are going to be doing beyond when they graduate. And there are a lot of ideas out there, some of which we've already touched on. You know, do we need to engage in developing AI literacy? Do we need to go down the path of developing critical thinking? Is that something we need to strongly focus on? Is this about self-regulated learning? And I think that there is some element of this that it's difficult to become good at learning with a machine if you don't understand your own learning particularly well, right? So some work that we've been doing recently is to try and tease this out. This is some work that I've collaborated on the Critical Thinking Project at the University of Queensland on. They have a very good rubric for separating out the elements that we understand about critical thinking. And what seems to be happening here is that we're starting to find where the limits are of machines as opposed to humans. And I think it nicely picks up on some of the comments that you made, particularly Raphaella, about this, that there are some parts of this where machines have got us beat. Right? Now, I'm not saying they can interpret or analyse, but they can certainly do a good job of simulating that. And they seem to do a pretty good job of being able to explain things. However, on the other side, they don't evaluate very well. Right? The things that we deal with in the world are human, they're social. Right? Inference is difficult. Right? Making meaning is also a human thing. And then the last one, I think it's on the label here, self-regulation. It's about the self. So when I think about the problems that we have and the risks that we have with assessment, there are some underlying questions that I think we need to continually ask ourselves for the chronic problem that we're going to face here. The first is there is a very interesting, nuanced, distinguished thing here between what critical thinking is and what it means to be a critical thinker. Right? There's an important difference between those two things. We also need to think about the balance between accumulating knowledge and becoming a professional who works with or alongside AI. That's not to say that we don't need to know things, right? It's hard to think critically about something if you have nothing to think critically about, right? So what is the balance of those things that we need to have in future? In a more simplified way, what is the balance we have between knowing and being in the world? What is it about us as humans in the world that is important? What is important about that in professions, in the workplace, and so on? So I'll leave you with this thought, and then I'm going to hand over to Rowena. It's not just a risk to assessment we're talking about here, but it's a fundamental challenge to how we educate. And we probably need to think about those two things hand in hand. Right? This is not electronic whiteboards again. Right? It's not MOOCs again. The relationship that we have with machines and by proxy that we have with information is changing because of this technology. And I think that we probably need to have that in mind when we're thinking more broadly about the changes that we need to make. So with that, hopefully we can get Rowena up on the screen now. Rowena, you were involved in the group that we had together in Sydney in August, and it was great to have your involvement there. You certainly made a major contribution to what we've ended up with. And you've been thinking about what this means for institutions as a result of that. So can you give us a sense about your journey with all of this and how it actually implements on the ground at ECU? Thanks, Rowena.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jason. I'm certainly going to talk about how ECU is thinking about the guidelines and planning to implement them. But I wanted to start by giving everyone a quick overview of what our university was doing to respond to AI before the guidelines were even a notion in people's minds. Because the guidelines, while they're really important in my view, weren't the beginning for most of us, and we'll all be considering them and implementing them in the context of all the work we were already doing to develop our institutional strategies. So this background will just help to put ECU's particular approach into context. So possibly it goes without saying, but AI in and of itself prompts higher education providers to respond. We've got responsibilities as public institutions and or self-accrediting institutions, and simply as providers of education, to be delivering contemporary, fit-for-purpose courses of study that prepare students for the world they're living in. The higher education standards also already required in a range of places that the kind of disruption represented by AI be addressed quickly and assertively. So we know that AI puts at risk the integrity of our methods of assessment and our ability to confidently certify that students have met course learning outcomes. But it also represents, as people have said, a really significant development in the ways in which different disciplines engage in problem solving and professional practice. And following on from that, ECU's curriculum design policies require a curriculum that's globally relevant. So this is all to say that the guidance from TEQSA that we're discussing today isn't what's driving our university to respond. It's providing really valuable support for conceptualising how we'll respond. So our response began back in January with a global email to all staff. I wanted to notify staff that we were on to this emerging issue, that we were thinking about it actively. I wanted to raise awareness among staff who weren't yet aware of it because most of our staff were still on leave. So I highlighted some of the clear opportunities as well as some of the known risks and linked people to some resources to find out more. I also really wanted to signal our intention not to institute a ban, but to leverage AI's opportunities as well as manage the risks. And also very critically, I had to signal to people that we were going to need to make assessment variations for semester one, and that advice on that was going to be, forthcoming. After we'd had 6 weeks or so to get ourselves organised, make those assessment variations and create staff and student resources, I sent a global email to students that served some of the same purposes as the staff email. I wanted to notify students that we were aware of AI and what it could do, and that we were also working to preserve the integrity of their courses, because I'd heard that that was something many students were worried about. I directed students to the updated academic integrity policy and resources that made clear any use of AI had to be acknowledged, and it provided guidance for how to do that. I also distributed a survey to try and capture student usage at that point and also student sentiment. We got lots of useful data, but one of the most important pieces for me related to ethics. Of all the students using AI, only about 30% expressed confidence in using it ethically. So that highlighted the need for us to start some concerted work around not only the productive use of AI, but also the ethical use of AI. One of the things we considered fairly early on was governance. Not only how we would govern changes to curriculum and assessment that we've been talking about today, but how we would govern our university's engagement with AI more generally. And when I initially took the AI issue to our executive, I'd proposed a governance group to look at it, to look at AI in learning and teaching. But the executive felt strongly that we needed a whole of institution steering committee. So this was established in June with me as chair. Our initial goal has been to develop a framework that both empowers and enables ECU staff and students in the productive and ethical use of artificial intelligence. And we've just published that framework, and I'll share it in a moment. We've published it internally for students and staff, but we're working to make it external at the moment. And sitting under that committee are 3 working groups: learning, teaching and student support, research and research training, and organisational productivity. And their purpose was to undertake a kind of SWOT analysis, looking at the different emerging uses of AI in their domains and work towards some high-level guidelines for responsible use. So this is our framework in visual form, and it owes a great deal to the expertise of our Professor of Business Ethics in our School of Business and Law, Edward Ray Bliss. And it's based on both AI research and policy and also best practice in organisational ethics frameworks. A framework was an important starting point for me because it gives staff permission to begin adopting AI in their context, but it also provides guardrails to protect staff, students and the institution and our community. People need to be able to make their own situated judgments because this is a really complex, emerging and evolving phenomenon that we have to collectively navigate. Productive and ethical use has to be everyone's responsibility. Some elements of this framework are in place now and some will be established in the coming weeks and months, but this is where we're going. Core to the framework are 5 ethical principles. And we developed these by collating all the ethical principles for AI use that we could find and distilling them down into a set of 5 that align with ECU's organisational values. And there's not really enough time to kind of read them out to you or let you sit and read them. So maybe take a picture if you're interested. But we're working on, as I said, an external facing site so we can share these in the framework externally. But we're hoping that these principles are not only useful for supporting AI adoption across those 3 domains of work I just mentioned, but I also see these ethical principles directly informing our curriculum and our assessment design. I think we'll need to teach these to staff and to students. So it was around the time that ECU's framework was coming together that the TEQSA guidance was also coming together. So I want to turn to that now and talk about the role I see it playing and how we're going to approach it at ECU. I've just come back from the US, where I attended EduCause, the huge higher education technology conference, where obviously AI was the #1 topic of conversation. But the tenor of the conversation was strikingly different in the US than it is in Australia now. The title of this presentation I attended is a very good capture of where the dialogue was in the US just in October. And this was a great presentation, don't get me wrong, it was incredibly sharp, but the discussions at the conference really reflected where Australia was back in January, by my estimation. I went to a 2-part leadership series on AI in education with an expert panel convened to discuss the challenges. And I was still debating questions such as, is AI a friend or a foe? Discuss. Questions we were kind of working through in January. And perhaps because in the US and most other countries, every institution's going it alone, and there's no one coordinating a national conversation or convening experts to make suggestions, the debate isn't coalescing around a shared sense of what might be done, or I got no sense of that at EduCause. And I was told by many delegates from the US and UK and other countries, oh, we're looking to Australia to see what to do. You're always ahead. So in my view, having national guidance is good for the sector as a whole, and it's putting Australia on the map as a country that's actively embracing AI and thinking critically about what it means for higher education. Also, I think other benefits are that assessment reform of this kind has not been done at scale. We'll achieve better outcomes if we're sharing and collaborating. And a shared approach also opens opportunities for funding projects, initiatives that could help us do this more efficiently. So as you pointed to, Jason, the main challenge for universities is the scale of change, and these guidelines these guidelines indicate, particularly because responding to AI is not the only thing that we are doing. The reality is that we can only devote a fraction of our organisational attention to this problem because we're working on other critical priorities at the same time, and on the screens are the ones that ECU is working on at the moment. Priorities really that address these really long-standing challenges in the sector, like equity and inclusion, retention, graduate outcomes. And I think there surely has to be a recognition at the federal level that disruption on the scale of AI needs more than guidance. Helpful as the guidance is, it needs support. To look at this in commercial terms, our sector is a really vital driver of the economy, and any support provided for the transformations we need to make, it surely needs to be viewed as an investment and not a cost. Otherwise, we'll be trying to do all of this within our existing budget envelopes and within an environment that no longer contains an Office for Learning and Teaching, for example, to help us with this. Another challenge is that assessment redesign is only the beginning, but it is a big beginning. So in a calendar year, ECU administers over 6,000 points of assessment, which translates to over 750,000 student submissions. So we administer that in a calendar year. There's an enormous amount of organisational resource tied up in assessment, and I'm working with finance at the moment to understand the real cost of assessment to us. As part of assessment reform, we'll need to adopt far more sophisticated assessment approaches which assess outcomes at the course rather than the unit level. And this will require changes to how we budget for assessment. There'll likely need to be less assessment across course, with resources redirected to two things: more secure programmatic tasks, as Jason's pointed to, and also enhanced teaching practice to ensure that students are actually capable of succeeding in those tasks. And there are other major challenges too. While our current approaches to assessment are compromised, they have served the purpose of giving students incremental feedback on their learning and enabled students to make incremental progress towards completing their course. The assessment reforms required by AI will disrupt that model. So teaching quality and feedback quality will become far more critical to our important metrics like equity, retention, and success. So we will probably need to quality assure those things in new ways. In addition, as more and more content creation becomes the product of sort of hybrid human AI collaboration, we'll need to redefine what academic integrity means. Enacting integrity through acknowledging sources is no longer an adequate construct. Instead, I think we need to expand our discourse around integrity to shift towards explicit education in ethics, which better addresses the kind of situated decision-making that everyone will need to engage in. And a final challenge is simply keeping our institutional knowledge up to date on the latest advancements in AI use. This is a real integrity issue. If academics don't know what AI is capable of doing, they can't redesign their assessment in response. So we're currently trying to establish mechanisms to get up-to-date information out to staff. While there are some of these big sort of conceptual and structural challenges that we're still working on and don't have answers for yet, we have got an agreement across the institution on what our course level review process will look like. So this is a bit more operational and procedural, but I thought it might be helpful for people to see how we're applying a really basic backwards mapping approach to a more programmatic approach to assessment and teaching practice. So we begin firstly by reviewing our course learning outcomes. Are they still fit for purpose to equip students to ethically and actively participate in a society pervaded, yes, Jason, I'm using the old word, I'll update it when I get the new version, with AI. Then we would look at curriculum. So what new knowledge, skills and capabilities need to be included? What's no longer relevant and where will the new curriculum sit? Then we'd look at designing new key assessment moments in the course, those highly secure assessment moments where the students really demonstrate learning against the learning outcomes, the course learning outcomes. And we really need to think then about what's needed to make decisions about student progression, student completion. Then once we have those key assessment moments, then we probably need to step back and look at our existing assessments, all those 6,000 points of assessment that are sitting there. And we need to think about what role they'll play going forward. Do they still support learning towards those key assessment moments? And if not, what will their role be? And then we need to consider unit learning outcomes, you know, in the context of a new sort of course level assessment strategy. What's the purpose of each unit and how do we really clearly articulate that to students? And then we need to think about teaching and feedback practices, as already been discussed. You know, what teaching strategies, learning activities and feedback practices do we need to make sure students can succeed? So finally, just thinking about how we might actually stage this, I think the kind of course review I just described will really need dedicated time. Course teams will need time to think, discuss, argue about what stays in, what might come out, engage in professional learning and actually do the redesign work and get it through governance. And this can't happen quickly, certainly not for all courses at the same time. However, we can't wait for all our courses to simply roll through our normal course review process to adopt assessment reform. 7 years is required by the standards, and even 5 years or maybe even 3 years is too long to wait to make these sort of reforms. So timing is going to be a balancing act, but we'll be taking a staged approach. So at the moment, I'm looking at what a 2-year implementation plan might mean for us. I'm currently identifying a pilot set of courses to undertake supported course review over the next 6 months. Through that process, we'll develop the credible plan for reform that TEQSA have signalled they'll ask for in June. But we'll also use that process to develop institutional advice and examples for all courses, identify any necessary policy updates, detail any new infrastructure requirements, establish hopefully some really efficient fit-for-purpose governance processes to make reform in other courses more streamlined where we can, and clarify the likely resourcing demands for reforming the rest of our courses. We'll also embed curriculum and assessment for AI into our major course review process. So any course undertaking schedule review will need to engage in reform. And simultaneously, we'll also need to continue to support other courses with interim assessment variations to manage risk in the meantime. And a business case is underway for resourcing to support this pilot work. Then I hope it'll be a matter of a rolling program of implementing the design changes and reviewing and changing all of our other courses over the subsequent 18 months. But this is very much dependent on resourcing and organisational capability. So I'll leave it there and I will hand back to you, Steve, and I'm looking forward to hearing questions that the audience might have for all of us.
You hear me? Thank you. So this is a time for you to ask questions, both in the room and online, and as has been the practice already today, please put your hand up and someone with a mic will come and find you. While you're thinking about it, I might ask you, Rowena, a question that you hinted at, and that's the scale of the challenge. And therefore, as a regulator of around 200 institutions, providers, not all of them of the scale of ECU, where does scale play a role in all of this and the amount of investment that is required to make this work?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a fabulous answer for that, except to say that I think the scale of it is really going to impact different providers very differently. And I certainly know coming out of the pandemic, each of our universities was in a very different financial position coming out of that. So I do think while every institution is going to have to look at how it manages scale, I think there are really strong reasons there for us to look at this federally at what's needed to support that scale.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of questions here. We've got one here. You go ahead.
Thank you. Claire Field, and I'm here with two hats on today as a consultant and as a student. And I'm going to be naughty. I don't have a question. I wanted to commend TEQSA and particularly Helen for your leadership. I would have said it was internationally significant. I think Professor Harper has just made that patently clear and truly, truly impressive. Thank you for all of your work.
Well, it's the first of many thanks for Helen and her team, and some of her team are at the back as well. We can get a mic over there as well. Yeah, there's one in the middle. Go okay. Next.
Hi, my name's Rosalie Ritter-Jones. I am a law student at University of Melbourne and also Vice President of our Graduate Student Association. So you mentioned the TEQSA guiding principles and also the impending RFIs into the learning action plans of providers. I'm just interested to see whether there's sort of any practical consequences for institutions who are maybe hesitant to embrace AI or integrate it or move to reforming assessment, given that it's going to be part of our society and our reality in the workforce. So yeah, what are the sort of practical consequences for maybe the more hesitant institutions?
Thanks for the question. It's a really complicated question because we're in a complicated time, and I'll probably give a complicated answer without meaning to. But I think where we are is in a time of kind of unprecedented and unexpected change in the scale. And I think one of the things we're trying to do by issuing the RFI is to create a sense of urgency, but also to create the authorising environment for institutions, because a lot of institutions are not the sole accrediting authority of their degree. There's also professional accreditation to consider, and we're going to be engaging with professional bodies in the new year to try and really understand how we can work together. Ultimately, we all want the same thing, which is safe, competent professionals, but just making sure that we can get that notion across about the fact that we are in a new world. Having said that, as Rowena alluded to, there's a practical reality that you can't do everything all at once, immediately across every course. So we recognise that this is going to be a multi-year project, and we really do want, and with the support we've tried to provide over the last 12 months, we want providers to be really honest with us about what are the friction points, what are the things that are really hard, what are the things where they need extra support, what are the things that might take longer. But I also think that by getting that sector-wide RFI, what we're going to see is an enormous amount of different approaches and good practice that we'll be able to reflect back to the sector, so that people who are struggling more, who haven't quite cracked it in one particular discipline, can actually see somewhere where, oh yeah, okay, I hadn't thought of that, that's a different way to look at it. So hopefully it'll support the transformation being faster.
Okay, we'll get a mic over there to you. You're next.
Thank you, panel. Kath Ellis from the University of Sydney. Hi, Rowena. Thank you very much. When ChatGPT launched in November last year and then GPT-4 in March this year, I think we were lucky of where we were in our academic year in some ways. Rowena, the experience you might have had at EduCause is because by about May in the Northern Hemisphere, our colleagues didn't have to sort of really think about it again until now. So perhaps that could be the reason why we're a little bit advanced. So just one thought. But Raphaella, I have a question that I'd like to put directly to you. Raphaella, if we think forward to your graduation and moving into the profession, perhaps working in the legal profession, a lot of people are now in the industry starting to think about all of the ways they can use generative AI to do a lot of the grunt work that may have previously been given to a newly hired graduate. That was the place where a lot of lawyers would cut their teeth as they learned the ropes of the profession. If that work is now being done by a robot, A, maybe we don't need as many lawyers, but B, the lawyers we graduate, how are they going to be able to bridge the gap between universities and the world of work? And what do we as universities need to think about as we prepare you to make that leap?
I think that's a really good question, and one that's definitely been the topic of discussion and research, which I've personally read and attended 2 lectures on. I think it doesn't have a very straightforward answer, but a short answer would be that I think it would help if the role of educators would be to prepare students for the workforce in using AI, especially in the legal profession. There are already a lot of legal tools to help alleviate those mundane tasks, which some people are concerned that we won't have enough lawyers and at some point we'll have a walking ChatGPT judge and on the bench, which, yeah, in America they've trialed that and it hasn't been doing that well. But then we also have lawyers who think they're cats, so we do have a big spectrum. But on a serious note, I do believe that we will still have lawyers because there are a lot of things which a robot can't do. As Jason was saying, there's part of the evaluation and the self-regulation, which is very much needed in the legal profession to actually have a personal connection to the client. And think maybe there's an obscure part of law which isn't just a very simple inference to draw, which a robot can do. And I think it's really about drawing out, embracing being a critical thinker and really drawing out the personal connections between the law and people and working together with robots to make that happen.
I had a thought that I wanted to run by you as well on that note. So if AI can replace some of the lower-level tasks, right? Why are students going to be doing that lower-level task when they graduate, or are they going to also be capable of doing high-level tasks because they'll also use AI when they graduate? Because yeah, so the AI raises the bar for the low-hanging fruit that the graduate people can do.
I definitely do think it raises the bar and the expectations of the skills which will be expected in the industry. Perhaps it might get rid of at some point paralegal roles and more administrative issues and bring people more straight away into the junior legal roles rather than going through that progression of a trainee, which is probably the role more for College of Law and those specific legal educators to train students and recent graduates to know how to do higher level thinking. It's definitely a place for educators, I think, to work on.
So a question in the middle.
A question for Rowena. Stephen Nagel is my name from Holmes Institute.
I was meaning the person who was before you, then you're next. Up the back.
Yep. Right here. Hi, panelists. Thank you for the conversation. My name is Shivani. I'm from Western Sydney University. I'm a student partner with the Student Staff Partnership team. I really love the conversation about quality, and my question is somewhat related. So just to paint a picture so the landscape we're in at the moment, higher education is increasingly embracing AI. But we're still in a generation where we have a basic fundamental understanding of skills, disciplinary knowledge, and AI actually appears to be useful. But what about like 5 years down the lane where we get high school students who increasingly use AI as a crutch, hyper-reliant on it, and they lack the ability to make judgments about the quality of their work. be it assessments or their research to the scholarly community. So my question is, first of all, what is critical thinking skills? What does that actually mean? And what steps should we be taking as universities to prepare that generation of high school students? Thoughts from any of the panelists, welcome.
Leo, you might have thought, but Leo and I had a little chat about this yesterday because he is a coder, which is something I cannot do at all. But you were saying talking about being in the flow state and it can give you code, and I was saying, yeah, but you know what roughly to look at because you learnt to code before ChatGPT. So do you have any thoughts in response to that?
Honestly, it's a question that I've been thinking about a lot because I don't have a clear answer for how to allow AI to be let students avoid using AI in introductory subjects, or avoid relying on AI in introductory subjects, because of course ChatGPT can finish the introductory subjects easily, but the students need that fundamental knowledge. I would say my best answer, and the thing I alluded to earlier, is that we should move towards project-based learning. So students wouldn't know that they need a fundamental skill without experiencing an environment where they need that fundamental skill. And if they are challenged to work on a project, they will need to learn that skill in order to be able to accomplish it. And they will feel that AI is not enough.
It's a great question. Thank you for the question. I think one important thing to stress here is that we're not doing this alone. So my colleague Christine Slade, who's in the room here, and I have been working with the Queensland Curriculum and Assessment Authority to think about what this looks like through the whole of secondary schooling, right up to the point where we're thinking about tertiary. The other thing that I would say is that there is a national framework for AI in schools. And again, Christine and I were part of the conversation. So I think what this says to me is that we're trying to do this together, because you're absolutely right. If we move in a certain direction in isolation from the other and all of the other levels of education and kinds of education, then we are going to be out of step with what's happening in other areas of schooling and training. So I think the bottom line is we need to work together, and I think the good news up until this point is we seem to be working together well, and let's hope that that continues.
Yeah, I think to steal one of Simon's quotes from, I think, webinar 1, but maybe webinar 3, where you said AI is a power tool, but we don't give power tools to babies. So we do have to think about how we carefully scaffold the introduction of these tools through the educational journey.
Well, next, and then the one behind. Yes, and can we get a mic over there, please?
Hi, Kane Murdoch from Macquarie. I have a question for Rowena. Aside from resources and the time to implement, from your experience, what was the major internal impediments to starting to roll out what you've just shown us?
Time was the key one. I think what I was seeing when I talked to staff across the institution was there's a really big appetite to do this. People are actually quite excited about the idea of, really interrogating our curriculum, and importantly, just not just for AI, but actually they're seeing this as a moment to look afresh at our curriculum in terms of embedding Indigenous cultures, histories, perspectives, employability, all those important outcomes I pointed to before. People are really looking at this as an opportunity to kind of holistically look at curriculum. But they just could not foresee how they would find the time, extract themselves from their already packed workload to do the deep thinking required. So time was the big one. And I think there was also an understanding that if we were potentially going to kind of shift our assessment practices in these ways as well, it might potentially go beyond just a curriculum design question, as I alluded to earlier, and actually involve our finance department in terms of restructuring how we budget for learning, teaching and assessment. And also potentially, we've just put in place the new enterprise bargaining agreement, and we don't know yet whether some of this might prompt us to go back to, workload models. And, we don't yet know whether there will be implications for things we've just agreed to in enterprise bargaining in terms of the way we employ people and deploy people around curriculum, teaching and assessment. So we're not sure yet if they're impediments, but they're these kind of big working unanswered questions, because we have to really work through the application of the guidance before we really understand what those big impediments may be.
patient gentleman.
No worries. Rowena, is there a case to
Sorry,
upgrade...
can you tell us who you are?
Sorry, Stephen Nagel is my name, from Holmes Institute. Rowena, is there a case to upgrade the higher education standards framework to include a new standard specifically relating to this discussion relating to AI?
Look, that might be a better question for Helen, but looking back on the standards, I couldn't see a need for that yet. As I said, I think we're yet to really roll our sleeves up and get into the thick of applying the guidance and really thinking through what AI means for our institutions. So I think 6 to 12 months down the road, we'll probably be in a far better position to answer that question more confidently. But at the moment, I think those 3 higher education standards I referred to on one of our slides probably cover, for me, you know, what we really need to hold ourselves to. They seem adequate to me for now, but as I say, in 12 months, we might be looking at them differently.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name's Harrison Oates. I am a computer science and PPE student at the ANU, and I am also the undergraduate coursework officer of ANU Students Association. My question's all sort of surrounding the equity around artificial intelligence and about how we are supposed to sort of go around and implement that. Obviously, like at the moment, AI takes a lot of compute to be able to run. It requires, for the really good models, like hundreds of dollars annual subscription. And it also raises questions around like how neurodiverse people of color, all of this end up actually being able to like advance sort of certain groups above others. I'm really interested to hear what the panel sort of suggests in designing assessments to sort of accommodate for those and the inherent biases behind the algorithms.
Thank you. If I can leap in initially to that, and it partly responds better to Kane's question as well, that is one barrier at the moment, actually, is the affordability of access to AI. Even if we were enthusiastically adopting it as a university, the current sort of enterprise models that we've looked at are completely financially beyond our reach. And so we couldn't, even if we were in a position where we were ready to, give all of our students access at the moment. So and that goes directly to equity of access. I think if we're going to really start designing the use of AI into our assessment tasks, we have to then at the same time make sure that every single student in that cohort has access, has equitable access. And that's got big implications for university budgets at the moment through things like licensing. And, you know, then there are other risks involved there too in terms of, you know, are we requiring students to set up an account with a tool that we don't necessarily have kind of enterprise oversight over? There are a whole lot of risks there around, you know, student data and information. So there's a lot to be unpacked just in terms of getting technical access to these tools if we're going to scale up our engagement.
It worries me when I hear people talk about institutional accounts, which it's not that I don't think that's a good idea, it's just that it almost feels like it could be a nod to equity without really thinking it through, because you'll still have the people who can buy the Ferrari. And in fact, if you didn't buy the Ferrari already, OpenAI is no longer selling Ferraris. They've closed their subscriptions to the paid model. So there is a really challenging question that we're going to have to think through.
The other thing, in the document itself, we very deliberately point to the National Framework for AI in Schools, not as a shortcut. We did talk about it quite a lot when we were together, but I think the thinking that went into the development of that framework, particularly led by Leslie Lobel from UTS, is really sound, and they've taken a long time to think very carefully through issues of equity, transparency, bias, and all of the problems that we know come with AI models. So we didn't want to shortcut that because it's absolutely critical, but we were able to point to some outstanding work, world-leading work that's happened here in Australia that I think gives us a really good foundation for thinking about those kinds of issues.
I was going to comment on the other side of the story, because we assume that, like, we talk about the equity side of adding AI to our lives, but what about the status quo? So, like, how much equity is there in the status quo right now? For example, there is a lot of, like, I'm not sure about all universities, but I've seen that around my university and some other related universities, how there is a strong culture around finding the right tutor, for example, because depending on which tutor you get, you can have a drastically different experience in how A, you are taught, and B, how you are marked. Like, to give marking examples, I had a friend who was doing a project where there was a very multifaceted project description. It was very he tried to go out of his way to come up with an innovative solution, but the tutor was just going down a prescribed checklist of dot points, and he got marked down because he wasn't going by the prescribed checklist, even though his solution was better than the prescribed one. And then another example was a friend of mine had submitted a report, a very fluent English report for some subject, and she got marked as poor spelling and grammar by an international tutor. She contested it, but the contestant, that didn't go through. So for things like that, if once we start implementing AI, of course, with a human as a co-pilot, with AI as a co-pilot, but a human in the loop, of course. I'm not saying use AI for everything entirely without a human in the loop. But once we start implementing AI, I'm sure that helps equalize the balance between what different students experience. And of course, what different students can ask their tutor, because their tutor can be someone who doesn't judge, a chatbot that doesn't judge, that doesn't always answers all the silly questions, can always rerun the conversation again, can judge the quality of their answers to other things. Anyway, I feel like AI can promote a lot of equity at the small subscription cost, but yeah.
I just wanted to add to that. It's an interesting point on sort of visible equity that comes out in the whole non-judgment from AI. But I think maybe something that's not very visible to people is that in the background of AI, fundamentally it has been made by humans, by human data. So while tutors and educators do have their own biases, which we can clearly see, with an AI we can't really see those biases, but it doesn't mean that they're not there. So I think it actually brings a hidden layer of inequity, which again goes back to the role of humans and what we program in it to be more equitable.
Now, we have a very patient person over there as well.
Thank you. Farzad, MIT.
Sorry, I did mean the person behind. Yeah. you're one here and then you.
Okay, I'm Noma Kamalo from the University of Canberra. I'm the TEQSA student representative for my uni. And my question was, so for those of us who are neurodivergent and have learning issues and that sort of a thing, what are we doing as institutions to help those students to feel more confident and to rely less on AI?
Who wants to take this one?
What was the question exactly? Rely less on AI? Wait, sorry. Sorry, can you repeat that again?
So for students who are neurodivergent or have learning difficulties, obviously there's the temptation or tendency to want to use AI to assist in assignments. How are we helping those students as tutors, as professionals, to avoid that tendency?
How do you add the human touch?
I think that's probably one for Rowena or Jason as the educators.
Well, certainly, I guess universities have got, generally built into their student support services. They've usually got disability service teams who've got, long history of working with staff and with students on sort of, making reasonable adjustments around assessment tasks, but also working on actually making our curriculum and our teaching practices more inclusive of student diversity, including neurodiversity. I think we've been looking at some of our data around this of late. It's an area where we need to do better at ECU. We've been looking at various forms of accessibility across our platforms and other contexts at ECU, and it's something we're actively trying to work on. But I think it's interesting that your question sort of has embedded in it the assumption, I guess, and perhaps this is based on your experience, which is interesting, which is that students who experience neurodiversity might be using AI more. And that's something I would like to understand more. I'm going to take that away as something for us to look at, because we actually do want to try and understand how diverse students are engaging with our AI right now. Updating that student survey I mentioned we ran back in March, what's changed now for students. So I think that's kind of an interesting idea that I'm going to take away and think about.
Great question and very important topic. Thank you. I think this does point to a particular situation that we find ourselves in, and Rowena, your comments, I think, speak to this as well. This technology has developed so quickly, we can see and we have some clues about some of the opportunities that it might provide, but we just haven't been able to do the research to be able to figure out how that is going to work most effectively for a very diverse range of students across the whole student population that we have. There's a lot of research that is going to have to go into this to figure out how we can get these things to do the things that we want them to do to help everybody. How long it's going to take to do that research is an open question. Can we do that research fast enough that the tools haven't changed a week later so that we then have to do it again and start all over? These are all open questions, and I think, you know, as a researcher, this is going to be a total cliche, but we need some way to support that research within Australia. Because we need to understand what these things mean in this context. My worry is if we don't do that, then the answers will be given to us by Silicon Valley, and I have a 3 and a 4-year-old, that's not what I want for them. Right? We need to do this properly, and that is the collective wisdom in this room, not the answers being given to us by people who have come in from overseas from tech companies.
Helen, the responses that you receive next year will help with some of that, won't it? But it's not an immediate answer.
No, not an immediate answer, but a really good question, and I think you've prompted a number of streams of thought for people in here to go back to their institutions and try to unpack that a bit.
Okay, we have another patient person.
Thank you so much. This is Dr. Sajia Parvin from Melbourne Polytechnic. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. And I would like to thank all panel members for today's incredible discussion. I know that every higher education provider, including universities and other institutes, are living such a challenging time because of this AI. So from my understanding, AI is running as a rabbit and we are running as a tortoise. So that's my feeling. Whatever discussion we have got today, so from there I got 2 points that we need to focus on: assessment and rubric design, which could help for our students. But again, it would take time. And definitely budget should be involved there, because it should not be done within months, within a semester. It is a long journey. What we could do that for our assessment task, we can add self-demonstration or practical demonstration or self-reflection, which could be a part of the assessment task, and this could be a hurdle for students. So this is my point of view, and we are practicing Bachelor of IT in Melbourne Polytechnic in this way, just to recover from this critical situation. But my question to all panel members: what should be the advice to our students that students should follow? Or what should be the general guideline for all of our students? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent question, but we need to be quick.
Eddie Jason. General guideline for everyone. I mean,
obviously
that's a big ask for everyone.
Look, it's a really good question, and I think the best advice I can give on this is that whatever advice that we do give, we need to update it. Like I don't think we want to be at a point now where we say this is the way it is, because everything is changing quite a lot. What I tend to do, which I think has been helpful for me to make sense of all this, I'm not a computer scientist. I find it difficult to keep up with the technological developments. I work with people who do keep up with that, is that I try to keep the focus on the things that we know are not changing, right? Who are our students? How do they learn? And if we take that as our starting point, as things change and as that pace of change starts to accelerate, I think that the advice that we can give students is going to have more longevity. But that's a difficult thing, because I think, as I said, you're going to have to revisit it. But let's start with the things that we know are stable.
Okay, so I've got 3 people in the queue, and I've got 1.5 minutes to go. Over there, in the middle, and down the front. Quick.
Okay. Thank you, Farzad, MIT. Sorry. At this point in time, AI, GAI, recycles the existing knowledge rather than generating new knowledge. Now, and that could be a potentially really helpful tool to elevate the game. You know, with respect to your taxi example, also to democratize knowledge, to my opinion. Just like mobile phones created converted everyone to a little journalist and photographer, etc. Now, calculators did remove the pain without too much damage. Computers did the same, etc. The real game changer, in my view, and that won't be too long, is when GAI start generating new knowledge. So my question is this. The higher educations as the bastions of innovation, why do we have to always wait for a problem like pandemic or GAI, etc., to unleash innovation rather than be proactive about this?
How long's a piece of string here? I'm not sure. Well, let's take it as a comment, and I think it's a worthwhile thing to think about. In the middle there.
This one's for Helen, David Morgan, Polytechnic Institute Australia. I appreciate what you said, Rowena, about implementing that degree of change. If the independent sector did that, we'd kill you at TEQSA. The sheer amount of reaccreditation work you'd have to do will swamp you and knock you out. What consideration's been given for that?
Good question.
Sorry, can I just, because it is actually really hard. It was about the work to create for TEQSA with the course reaccreditation. Yeah, and look, we are having those conversations internally about the best way to do that and what we need to think about in terms of accreditation and reaccreditation processes. I think one of the things that's critical about what we're proposing and what's proposed in the principles with that move to a more programmatic approach is that we're saying, I guess in a sense, we need to do less of what's futile to free up resource to do what's really needed. So it's not that every single assessment task needs to be retooled and made to be this high. It's about, across a program of study, where you, if you don't already have them, adding in the critical moments that inform the progression and completion. So, you know, it's not that we imagine that tomorrow every single person would bring forward, you know, a wholly designed new program for every discipline. But yeah, you're right. It's significant work, not just for you and us, and but the accrediting bodies as well. And it's something that we're just going to have to keep working in partnership together.
Okay, last question.
Hi,
Make it quick, please.
I'll try. It's probably more of a comment than actually if anything in question, really. I'm Jackie, RMIT academic board member. And I guess what comes, I keep thinking about, it's why maybe not a full question, but it's kind of, I think of two general kinds of students. There's students like yourself where you can have great things you can do with this technology, but I also think of like myself in Enviro, and it's there, but it's not like something that we kind of live and breathe into our passion. And then you guys might have more courses where you, I guess, like learn about it, like, is it yes, I say. I'm getting to my point, sorry. Yeah, so there's classes, like a course like this where it's very much embedded, where there's other ones where it's more a little bit indirect, and as I pointed out, it's a global aspect, not just like within a school, it's the country aspect. So it's not a matter of the power tools to baby aspect we part on later on. People becoming aware of it way before we get to universities and learning at their own accord, learning through different like global aspects. So I think I would wonder, it'd be, sorry, I'm going to have to have some stress because it's the last question. But it's a bit of like, how do you, like, sorry. Yeah, I guess the point is I see that it'd be great for the students who are very much involved with their degree and it's very targeted towards their degree, but I have a concern, I guess, academic integrity for the students who see even more just like a way to make uni a little bit like get stuff done quicker, for example, where with the balance of like the stress of like cost of living at the moment, having to work more instead of balancing, prioritizing uni as much now. It's like, oh, okay, I can do this really quickly instead of putting in the effort of learning this background critical thinking there. So maybe it's more of a transitional period with the speed bump going through and it'll be fixed later on. But that's something I keep thinking about with the students who it's very specialized and they can understand have this ethical aspect of knowledge there too. But the students who don't have that, they will be seeing it right now as a get out of jail free card and move past it.
You enjoying it?
I think that's my point. Sorry.
Tackle the question? Not an easy one.
Yeah, it's not an easy question. Because yeah, like, pretty sure there was a very similar point about like the types of students back in yesterday's masterclass, where the students who are like motivated and they have like they have the ability to do the work and they do the work, and there's students who have the ability to do the work and do the work and they promote others, but at the very top the students who like don't have the ability to do the work and they don't do the work either, or like, and there's a spectrum in between. And yeah, I feel like that's more of a like
Yeah, I think there's a discipline element to what you're saying as well, which is really critical, and that's one of the things that we, the expert team, talk about, and that we talk about, when we're going around talking to people in the sector, that this is really contextual and discipline specific, and assessment is and should be really contextual and discipline specific. So when we're talking about, making sure graduates are equipped to use AI, we are talking, probably some fundamental principles that will be embedded in so much of the world and what we use. But then the other bit is the discipline knowledge and about using it in a way that you will actually use it when you're working.
Okay. Thank you for your participation. Please join me in thanking Jason, Rowena, Helen, Leo and Raphaella. And we'll be back soon, sooner than I was going to give you.
Okay, can I please ask everyone to take their seats so we can begin this final session?